I've lived a bit of life by now. I've met a lot of people. One thing I see in every human being is that underneath their surface, there is magic. Some talent, some gift, some passion or interest, maybe even a soul-deep calling. When I talk with them about the things they love the most, people tend to open up and come alive. When they do, interesting conversations tend to happen. Through thoughtfulness, laughter, and even sometimes tears, they share their magic in ways that intrigue, excite, inform, and change things. Join me one episode, one conversation at a time for a quest behind the magic with Amie Mauser.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome, friends. My name is Amie Mauser, and today we are going behind the magic with Raziel Pollack. Raziel has led an extraordinarily magical life. She's the author of 46 books, including 2 award-winning novels and a series of books on tarot known around the world. Her work has been translated into 15 languages, and she has taught in 12 countries. She inspires tarot enthusiasts and literature lovers around the world. Thanks so much for being here today, Raziel.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So one of the ways that we get behind the magic is that before we connected for today's interview, I worked a little bit of your numerology with your permission and worked out your birth cards, which I know you already know those things. But for our listeners who may not know, this is kind of our way to pull back the curtain and talk about some of the fun things about you beyond what we know on the surface, reading your books and learning from you at conventions and online. And so your birth cards are an interesting pairing of strength and the star, which I know you know. And this really is a very interesting pairing for me, where we look at, this place of needing to find this connection to divinity and to higher mind in order to live in this world in a way that was most pleasing and most real and most beautiful to you as a writer and many other things. And now that you've learned that, the short story could kind of go, now you get to live among the stars and tell us all about them, and pour out that wisdom into both the water of the earth and the land. And so I love that set of birth cards, and it's no wonder that you are a little bit more than a star to most of us. So do you have any other interesting insights about your birth cards that you'd like to share?
Yes, it's very interesting because it seems like I'm all of a piece. My birthday is actually 17/8. So besides it's the same numbers, it also means I'm a Leo, and Leo is the theme of the Strength card, of course.
Yes.
And the star cards had great meaning for me on many levels. In particular, the connection to the goddess Persephone, and because of the pouring of the water from 2 vessels, which relates to the mysteries. I won't go into that. But so this has really been a very significant thing in my life. And then when you're a Leo, being a Leo is great. I once said that if you're a Leo and you're feeling depressed or low, go to a bookstore, and find a cheap astrology book and look up what it says about Leo. It'll cheer you right up.
Absolutely.
Because there's negative stuff, and Leo's just great. So that was all good. And 17/8, is all good. But wonderful Israeli Kabbalist and magician and tarotist named David Shar taught me how to make a tree of life with your birth card, which actually comes from Walt Amberstone, who's taught a course on this. It's wonderful.
Yes.
And so you have 8 at the top and 17 at the bottom. So I always thought that these were great things to have, Great, but then it's like in the middle of the tree is death. In Tiferet, right in the middle. And then at the bottom, just before the star, is the tower. So it's a difficult journey from 8 to 17. Because if you go down the middle of the tree, you go from 8 to 13. So from strength to death, then from death to the tower, and then from the tower to the happy star. And when I first heard the idea, you have a tree of life, I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense because there's 7 billion people in the world, and and would mean that it was like figured out was 7,777,707 people would all have the same exact tree.
Right.
But then for each person, it's somehow different. And when I did it for myself, I was just astonished at how much it illuminated my life. I won't go into it, but so those 17 8 things are very significant for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look very forward to having a reading with you where we talk about making my tree together, because I feel like that will be very enlightening, and loved your suggestion about doing that in future. So I'm excited to do that this year.
What are your numbers? Remind me.
So I am I'm a Hanged Man Empress.
Okay, wow, that's a good one. Interesting. Wow. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah.
Yep. Huh. So, and so other people also would tag the world onto the end of there as well, and be all the 3s. So I think it depends on whose school of thought you're coming from, but it's kind of an interesting deal, and how much we find in these cards and in birth cards about the individuals. The other thing that's so cool is numerology. I love it. I do charts for people all the time. Now, I did not pull the full chart, right? But I did run your numbers for one specific part in the charts that I do. And it's called like the Soul's Urge or the Soul's Fulfillment card. And in that place, you are a number 5, and it's a 14-5, which if we looked at that in tarot, that would be another thing entirely, which is kind of cool. Yeah. But when we look at it in numerology, the 5 really is kind of the freedom-loving adventurer, which I thought was just amazing, because you've traveled so much, you have found your voice in such a beautiful way and shared it. And you don't strike me, after a few conversations with you, you just don't really strike me as the type of person who likes to be boxed in, right? Not at all.
Definitely not. Yeah.
And one of the wonderful and interesting things about that is that a lot of times 5s are popular and sought after storytellers.
Oh, that's great.
And I was like, well, if that's not Raziel Pollack, I don't know what is. And so, and we'll talk a lot today about storytelling, because that's probably in your top 3 to 5 things to do, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. No, I love storytelling in all kinds of ways, just in conversation like we're doing now, to put stories in it, obviously to write and make up stories, and also to me the tarot is a book of stories.
Absolutely.
I respect the whole idea of the doctrines of it, the correspondences, that is the key to a vast occult system of knowledge, but that's never really me. I respect it, and I'll use some of that thing for stories. As springboards to a story. But storytelling with the cards is to me what it's all about. And always has been from when I first got them. I immediately started looking at them in terms of moments and stories.
Yeah, and it's kind of an endless kaleidoscope, right? Yes, they can move themselves in any different way and show us very different things. Speaking of cards, it would be great to kind of go beyond the magic, behind the magic there, and kind of pull a card about what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
And so you said you would be very gracious and pull a card as well. So would you like to pull the first card about the things we'll talk about today?
Sure. So I've got the Shining Tribe deck, which I made. This two. The bottom card, I'll show you. There's a bottom card, I think. It's actually very cool. So the bottom card is called The Place of Trees. It could be the Page of Wands. The court card is replaced by what I call a vision card, which is progress. A place and a gift, and a knower, and then finally a speaker. But the Place of Trees is the place where people gather together in a joyous way. And it's inspired by I guess it's a plaque or something from ancient Crete. And I tried to copy it really closely. But it's a garden. It's a garden of trees where people are at ease and people are joyous. The famous double axe of the goddess is there as well. It's not a weapon. It was a worship object. So that's, I think, a wonderful indication of us meeting here and sharing things and opening things up for people.
That's beautiful. Really I love that. I love the deck. Those are great images. And I'm using the Fountain Tarot, which was gifted to me by my son. And interestingly, I pulled a 10 of Swords reversed.
Wow.
So I think that's very interesting because we're going behind the magic. And if we think of the swords as air, which is what I attribute them to air, and I read reversals. And so it's kind of an interesting place of the possibility of this time together to be talking about, and this is kind of double entendre, it's kind of fun, to be kind of talking about getting maybe some new ways of thinking about things. Okay. And the really fun part is that one of the things we're going to talk about next is your love of fountain pens. Look at them all.
All of them, all of them, exactly. That's true.
And so...
Are they pens in the picture?
Say again?
Are they actually pens in the picture?
They aren't, but my immediate...
Yes, I can see that totally.
In the picture, but my immediate thing was, oh my gosh, it's a whole bunch of fountain pens, and how bright the things of our experience on Earth and bring it down into written form, which is what you've done so eloquently and beautifully in so many ways. And hopefully that our time together will also bring our listeners some freedom to find the freedom-loving adventurer inside of themselves and the permission to go forward and do the things that they love to do as well. So now that we are officially behind the magic, I would love to talk to you about this whole thing with fountain pens. So I have to know, what first interested you in fountain pens? What was the pull? What was the draw?
As soon as I saw one and had one in my hand, I think it was 6th grade, a long time ago, because I'm old. And Schaefer Pens wanted to introduce they knew what they call cartridge pens. So a very simple method of filling it, you just stick a cartridge in it. You don't have to mess around with various kinds of mechanisms. Anyway, but they were trying to pitch it to kids, so they had these very expensive ones, and they handed them out to kids in classes. I think the idea was you would get into this and then you would pay for the cartridges, and that's how they'd make their money. So I got one of those, and I just immediately in love with it. I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Because I think even in 6th grade, I wanted to be a writer, and this seemed such a magical writer object.
Yeah.
It's actually used this beautiful old antique kind of thing. This is very modern, but it felt like an old kind of thing, of course. And so I just started doing it. But then, then I drifted away from it because they were expensive and hard to find. And then at a certain point, I just found my way back to it. And it's one of my great passions. I have hundreds of pens.
That was my next question, was how many do you have?
I don't dare to count them. But they range in price from like $4 or $2 to maybe $300.
Wow.
Those are obviously but not very many of those, and they're for special occasions. So I had a pen made for my 70th birthday, which I actually get. Could I step away for a second?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, yeah. Hi. So there's this wonderful man named Sean Newton, and he was a teacher for many years. I think he taught mathematics in high school, and he started making fountain pens as a hobby. And part of the purpose was to give some of the money to scholarships for his students. Really nice guy. And so I commissioned a pen from him for my 70th birthday. It's really beautiful. I hope you can see it. It's a little bit hard to see the textures. Yeah,
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. But then he also engraves things on them, usually put someone's name. So I sent him a picture of my Shining Tribe card, the Shining Woman, the World card, number 21. And he said, oh, we have to do this. He got so excited, and he did this stunning job. Isn't that gorgeous?
Oh my goodness.
It's just so beautiful,
That is beautiful.
Yeah. So this one is always filled with ink and always on my desk. And
I wondered if how often is this your kind of daily writing tool, or do you only use it for special things?
I don't use it every day. I use it for letters and sometimes for writing something. It's always there. And it works every time. One thing about fountain pens is if you don't use them for a few days, maybe even just a couple of days sometimes, they stop writing because the ink drains out of the part with the point is. So you have to prime them, it's called. And this one always writes. It'll be there for weeks. It writes the first second I pick it up.
Oh wow!
Isn't that great?
So that's almost a little bit magical in its way of.
It really is, yeah.
Of being, because it's not how it would perform under any other circumstances. Yeah.
And the other thing about fountain pens is that people usually rotate them. This is the term in the fountain pen world, and so some people never write with them. People are hardcore collectors; they just collect them as objects. Mm-hmm. But most of us write with them. That's part of the point. But then you have a bunch of them, and you just use some, and then they empty the ink, and you clean it and pick up another one. And that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun of having so many. It's such a variety.
Yeah.
So, but as I said, the Shining Tribe one is always there. It's never taken out of rotation.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so for someone who grew up, so I grew up, and in my home, we only had ballpoint pens, largely because my grandparents who raised me were, one was blind and one was legally blind.
Wow.
And so a fountain pen could cause a lot of really big problems for someone who is not sighted, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we really liked the big pens at our house because you could control them.
If you're not sighted, wouldn't we write with anything be difficult because you're not seeing what the pen is doing?
Exactly. Well, so my grandfather my grandfather was a concert pianist and organist, and though he was blind his whole life, he'd be 100 now. And so he didn't write much, but he knew how to write his name. So he would write right-handed like this, and he would have his other finger to guide the letters along. So he didn't like his handwriting.
Ink would smear if you had a fountain pen.
And he didn't like his handwriting, but I loved it. Like when he would write on a birthday card or something like that, it just always meant everything to me. And so he would write on cards and things for me, even whole sentences. And so those were really very treasured things for me. And my grandmother, of course, she was legally blind, so she could see well enough to write. She just couldn't drive and do things like that. And so I honestly have no idea how a fountain pen works. And I don't think I'm the only I can't be the only listener that doesn't know how they work. Could you tell us a little bit about how they work?
Well, you have first to fill it, of course, and modern pens use, like I said, a cartridge or what's called a converter, which is a piston that fits into the cartridge slot to make it easy. And I like that a lot. But the older pens have various filling systems. The most common is the lever. And so, if I can show you, if you can see the little lever here, right there? Yeah. So, the pen's empty, and you pull that down, and that has the effect of squeezing inside. There's what's called a sac or a bladder. Mm-hmm. And so that squeezes it, so it flattens it. Then you stick it into the ink bottle. the entire point has to go in, and then
Yeah.
you let the lever go, and that sac expands, and so
Okay.
it fills with the vacuum fills up with liquid, which is ink, and that's it. But the key to a fountain pen, what made it possible to really work was, let's see if this one shows it, is this part here,
Yeah.
which is called the feed. And
Okay.
the modern fountain pen was invented by Louis Waterman of Waterman Pens. And there's a famous story that he wanted to sign some important documents with the pen he had at the time, and it sort of blurted out a blop of ink and ruined the contract. Because he said, I'm going to invent a better version. But in fact, that's not true. It's a myth. In fact, he'd been thinking for some years about it. This would be a good thing to invent. And so he just invented this feed that kind of controls the flow of ink from the body of the pen onto the point of the page. And that's what made it all possible. So that's really what all it is. It's a really simple process.
So much simpler than I would have thought. And then
Yeah.
if you have the ones with the cartridges, it's even more simple than that,
But
right?
it's simpler to fill it, but that's not, otherwise it's the same thing. Old fountain pens, the original fountain pens from Waterman and on, had feeds made of hard rubber, which is they call ebonite, which is a really good substance. The pens themselves are made of hard rubber, actually. Very powerful substance. But that became expensive. So modern ones, the feeds are made of plastic, and that problems. They often just drain out.
Uh-huh.
You have to turn the piston in the converter, squeeze the cartridge or whatever to get it going again, which is not a big deal. It's just part of the ritual.
Right. But you like and my understanding is that you like the older ones better than the newer ones.
I like both. I have to say, there's some wonderful new ones, and the old ones tend to have better nibs. Because, the modern ones, a lot of modern ones are made to be pretty. And so they don't really care that much about the nib. They put in something cheap. Because you're buying it for this beautiful acrylic swirls of color and so on, which is great, But it's nice if you can substitute a better nib, and sometimes you can do that. But the old ones, that was the main feature. And the old ones, a lot of them had what's called a flexible nib, which means that if you press more, the line widens. Because the fountain pen nib is not a single thing, it's like two halves. And then if you press it down, it widens a bit, right? And so that means more ink is coming out. So you have a wider line, and then if you let it go again, it comes back to narrow. You have a narrow line. So it's very expressive. That's part of what I love about it. Let me see which of these pens I have here that's filled, that has that. Let's see, I think there was one, but I'm not sure now. Yeah. I don't have one. Let me see if I can do it with this one. Hang on a second.
It reminds me of like the lines of calligraphy too.
Yeah. Yes. Calligraphic pen. A calligraphy pen does not have that open and closing thing, but it has a kind of a certain kind of point. Right. That horizontally is very narrow and vertically is wider. Can you hang on for one more second, and I'll come right back?
Sure.
Okay, I've got a couple. Hopefully one of them will be working right now. I won't have to fuss with it to have it do what I wanted to do, and I'll just see in a second. This one seems to be working. Okay, so let me get a piece of paper, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. There's a nice piece of paper. Okay, here. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. It's a small. If I ever collected anything by brand, it would be this brand called Wahl, W-A-H-L, from the 1920s and so on.
Wow.
I just think this is so beautiful. That's what's called a tulip clip, because there's a little tulip here, and I love the clip. It seems so elegant.
Yeah.
And so let's see if I can show you what I mean. So here the first part is fairly narrow without pressure. You see that?
Right.
Okay. And then if I add pressure, I get that.
Oh, wow.
And then what you can do is you can do swirls. I'll show you that. So isn't that great?
Oh, that's beautiful. You're winning me over to fountain pens.
Yeah, yeah. So I have to tell you how I first found out about this. It's a great story.
Yeah.
So I was, collecting modern pens. I'm collecting. I had bought a few, and I was in this stationery store in New York City in Soho, and I don't know if they're there anymore, sadly. And they had a fountain pen counter. So I was admiring them, and one of the salesmen came over, and he said, "Can I help you?" I sort of had this desire to show him I was not a novice. So I pointed to this one Italian pen. I said, "Well, I would love to get that Omas Paragon, but it's way beyond my price range." So, oh, we said, fountain pens. So it had the effect, that was the effect I wanted.
Right, exactly.
And then they did this really cool thing. So you know how, like in movies, the person who's selling counterfeit things or selling drugs, whatever, looks
Right.
around to make sure there's nobody can spot him, and he says, "Let me show you." He opens his, takes something out. See, he did that. He looked around, see his boss wasn't there. He took out this silver pen. He said, "I want to show you something." And he did that. What I just showed you with those loops, I was just stunned. I was flabbergasted. And he told me it was called the flexible nib. He explained it to me. He said it's in vintage pens. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I just tracked it down. I went to the site and he got that one. It was very expensive. So I just thought all these were very expensive. I just figured, okay, I'll never get one of those. And then so it wasn't true. And particularly the smaller ones are not expensive, or they're still expensive, but not like the big ones. So this is
Right.
called a ring top because it has a little ring on top instead of a clip, right?
Uh-huh.
And this is also small, and I'll
Mhm.
tell you the smallest one I have, which I inspired a book, and it's this one,
Oh,
yeah. So see if you can guess why these small ornate pens are much less expensive for collectors.
so are the small ones less expensive? Is that the question?
Yes, and I'll give you a clue that the bigger and thicker, the longer and thicker the pen is, the more valuable it is for collectors.
Okay. So that's very interesting. And it seems like you're asking me a trick question.
Well, I'll give you another clue that most of these rich collectors are men.
Ah, so the smaller pens are worth less because their hands are too big and beefy,
Well, no,
right?
because they're for ladies.
Because they're for ladies.
Yeah, there's sometimes these discussions on these pen sites. I can't get over this, in which these guys are debating which one's pen is the longest, the thickest, and squirts the most ink.
That is hilarious.
And aren't they conscious of? So at one time I wanted to say to someone, but I knew I'd get in trouble. I wanted to say, "You're the person who puts the I in pens." So pens that were made for women are just not valuable.
Isn't that
But they're
interesting?
some of the nicest because they have beautiful to look at. They're expressive in their writing. Because
Right.
women tend to write more expressive styles of writing.
Right. And it shows us really how much misogyny there was going back
Always, yeah. Sure.
in even being able to learn to write, allowed to learn to write,
Yes,
much
that's
less
true too, yeah.
being valued as an author or
Yeah,
anything like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that these were
No.
issues
Yeah,
that were
yeah.
very big and insurmountable. And
Yeah.
so, which brings us to another interesting question because, you know, as a lyricist, for example, I'll hear 2 or 3 words or a little phrase and
yeah.
need to go and write that down,
Yes.
and then the rest of it starts to come. And I'm really fancy. My Ticonderoga pencils and my really good
Oh,
pencil
but that's a great
sharpener,
tradition,
that's my
actually.
thing.
Writing with good quality pencils. Hemingway famously always wrote with the number 2 pencil, standing upright by a drawing board. So his yellow legal pad, he wrote a yellow legal pad, and I was on the drawing board, so he didn't have to sit down. I think he started at 6 in the morning, 5 or 6 in the morning.
Wow. And that's very interesting to me too, because I have never understood why I am about pencils. And if you could see my desk right now, there's probably 6 legal pads sitting here of
Yeah,
various
see?
colors.
Yeah, you and
So
Hemingway, see?
now we know. That and the polydactyl cats with the 6 toes. I don't know if you've been to Key West to his
No,
home in Key
no,
West,
no.
but part of his estate is in taking care of all of these polydactyl cats. He's got all these 6-toed cats. It's really cool.
Good for him. It's nice. I didn't know that about him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing. It was so cool to just watch all these really neat cats walking around with 6 toes. But so the pens themselves for you have become a muse of sorts at times,
very
right?
much, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how that comes to be and how often you begin with pen and paper rather than keyboard and
Well, first of all, everything is pen and paper. Everything I write is done in longhand, usually in large journals. So I've already written quite a bit before I stop and count, because I try to write 1,000 words a day.
Okay.
That's another thing the writers do, is have a daily amount that we do. So that's all. So it's always a fountain pen, on good quality paper, because it inspires me to do it.
Yeah.
The desire to write is fueled by knowing I have this beautiful pen to do it with, and a beautiful notebook.
It's
So
a little
it's always money worth
business.
spent in terms of my work and value and the money I spend on it. But also I get inspired by the pens, in particular pens with names or initials on them. That's also another thing that's more, I think, probably was more common on fountain pens for women. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not, but a lot of the smaller pens definitely have beautifully ornate initials or names. So I have done several books or stories inspired by pens. One of them is, let's see what this one is. Okay. I have actually 2 pens that are like sisters. They're almost identical.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
see.
slightly different. And so one of the older one has on the name M. Matthias, Matyas. And as soon as I looked at that, the name Master Matthias came into my mind. And a whole idea for a story about this magician who rises to the highest levels and then falls to the deepest depths and has to be redeemed. And I wrote it for a story called Master Matthias, for a book of divination-themed stories called Tarot Perfection. And then after that, I became interested in expanding that story. So it became part of a story called The Child Eater, a novel which was published a few years ago. I have that here, so I'll just hold it up to show people.
Yes. We love to see all the
Yeah,
things.
this is it. Yeah, The Child Eater, it's called. And so this was directly inspired by that pen. And Matthias became this, I think, one of my best characters, and I loved writing about him. Very difficult and challenging, and so there's that one. And now its sister pen has a name on it, R.P. Wolfe. R.P. and then W.L.O.L.F.E. I guess you can't see it. Anyway. So immediately I started playing with, R.P. Rachel Pollack, Wolfe being a werewolf, and then there's my favorite detective is Nero Wolfe, mystery stories. So I thought if could be, I could be a fat detective because Nero Wolfe is very fat, famously. But then I went back to the werewolf idea, and I came up with a story that's still in progress. It's not finished, but half done. And it's a story about a woman named Rebecca Park, who is a therapist. And she has a client who claims he's not really a human being, he's an animal. And he's been imprisoned, in a sense, in a human skin. And he's trying to get liberated. And clearly he knows something about her, and he's trying to lure her into claiming that she's like him. And she becomes fixated on, and this turns out there's a werewolf cult in Central Park. And it's a magical cult. So it's a very mysterious kind of stuff. It's all inspired by this name, R.P. Wolfe.
It's amazing what can come just from that little bit. Do you remember where you where you got those two pens, where they were sourced?
Usually just online at a from a dealer. I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly who it was. Yeah.
And these are just kind of antique pens that someone somewhere
Yeah.
else owned and went with their estate,
And had their
right?
name on it, the name with their initials. Yeah. Oh, one more, because there's also a story. I'm just about finishing another novella, but a little shorter.
Yeah.
So this is a pen I just love. It's just very small one I showed you. Give you an idea of how small this is. Here is the biggest one I have here, which is the one made for me, right? And so here's this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little baby, you know?
Yeah.
And this one has on it the initials L OLF. Now, so let's say immediately a name or phrase came to mind. Ordo Lumina Furiosa. The
Okay.
Order of the Furious Light, a magical order that has to do with fury and light and fire and power. And I started thinking of a story about this.
Yeah.
And in the story, it's this young woman. She's a girl, actually. She's about 12. I have to say she's 12 or 13. And she's kind of lonely. She's a bit of an outcast. She tries to cast herself as a rebel, a witch, and an anti-patriarchy, but she's also just very lonely. Because, she has no friends because she's so strange. And she changed her name one day. She basically decides to change her name to Olivia Luminaria Featherstone. And then she goes out and gets the mail, and there's this pen, which I described exactly as it is. And it says on it OLF, which is her initials, so she just changed her name. So this sets her off on this quest to find out what's going on. And she finds out about the Ordo Lumina Furiosa, and it ends up in a very intense ending. But I actually know what those initials are.
Okay.
Because when I bought the pen, it came in its original box, which is very rare. It's a very cool little box,
Oh, neat.
And in the box, I discovered after I had come up with my own fantasy of the name, actually on the back of the box, it says two things. It says, Miss Olive L. Fletcher, Holcomb, New York.
Interesting.
And then it says, was it December 15th, 19, let's see if I can make it, it's a little faded. Looks like 1925, maybe. I'm not sure, actually.
Wow.
And then at the top is written, from Daddy, for quotation marks, Batsy, which obviously was his nickname for Olive.
Yeah.
So I tried Googling her name, Holcomb, New York, but I never got anywhere. So it's funny that, it's funny because I actually know what all that stands for, but in my mind, it's Ordo Lumina Furiosa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And immediately, my it's just heartwarming that in 1925,
yeah,
a daddy,
I know, isn't that sweet?
In the writing of his little girl enough to give her an instrument.
Yes.
That's
I know,
a
it's a love
thing.
story. It really is. Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of these fountain pens have these names in them,
Yeah.
Someone gave me one once that had this great name. It was Erwin, Erwin L. Furry, Furrey. And it's just like a character in the Bugs Bunny cartoon. Erwin L. Furry. I tried looking that up. I actually found one, but it was
Elmer Fudd's
exactly.
brother.
Yeah, exactly. His cousin or something. Yeah, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So part of the whole thing of this, it's so much fun. This history is real and imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that you extrapolate such incredible, whole worlds and people and stories and all of that just from these small little
I know
seeds, they're like seeds that you grow kind of mighty oaks out of. It's pretty neat.
One more. This is it's actually an inexpensive pen. So if you look at the top of it, there's a little blue plate, and on it says the Franklin Fire Insurance Company, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So it was a publicity thing. It was a handout. But it's beautiful. It's all this, gold, columns of fleur-de-lis. And on this pen, initial ELM. And I played around with that, and I thought of electrolyte magnetism, Eliphas Levi magician, which is a great, tarot history thing.
Sure.
But then I finally came up with Extasia Lux Materia, which became my magical slogan. When I make something, I invoke that phrase, which means the ecstasy of light and matter, which is to trap light, creative light, into a physical object. Well, not trap it, but embody it.
I have to make a note.
Yeah. So when I make a necklace or something, I'll at the end I'll cry out Excelsior Lux Materia. And I'll use this pen as a magic wand sometimes.
I love that. I love that on every level. That is so
isn't that
cool.
great? Yeah.
It's amazing. And this is some of that stuff that's behind the magic. It's like, who knew? Who knew? I guess I felt like, and maybe have felt this way since I was a little girl, that serious writers typed on a typewriter because that's what my granddad did, So it's so liberating to, and I hope it is for our listeners too, and our viewers to understand that you can use mundane tools for inspiration and to create the magic that only you can create. It's a beautiful thing.
There's a fair number of writers who use fountain pens these days still.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah, others just use a pen, not a fountain pen. It's actually interesting. I was once at this writer's retreat, and it was all people who had to be professional, had to have sold at least one story. And a lot of them made their living as writers. And most of them thought it was the strangest thing in the world that I hand wrote my stories with a fountain pen. They all use computers,
right?
Which is obviously much more efficient, which I then used for the second draft. But anyway, but I later found out that actually there's kind of a split between writers who primarily write for a living and writers who write to produce something they love. And the second group tend to use pens and fountain pens more.
Yeah, because it's more of an artistic process than a production of an item.
Yeah,
the process is different.
And the mind works differently too. The mind gets more into the intricacies if you use a pen, and I would say especially a fountain pen, because of the expressiveness of the pen, of the point.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably opens up the channel.
Yeah.
And the neural pathways that fire all of that creativity around, right?
Yes.
That's really cool. So I also know that you brought a necklace or two to show us.
Yes, yeah. I have a couple. I'll show you the one I'm wearing. So let's see if you can see this. So this is an owl from an artist, I can't remember her name right now, Sally, but she's just released the Tulip Oracle, which is a beautiful oracle deck. I wrote an endorsement of it. And I got this from her. And then I get these magical symbols, and I make a bead necklace to go with it. You can see the beads here. Usually, they're pretty all semi-precious stones. And so, but they're also geared to the day. So Thursday, or Thor's Day, is geared to the planet Jupiter and the god Zeus, right?
Okay.
Well, I'm not a fan of. Kind of, somewhat tyrannical. Anyway, so I tend to use things that are connected to him, but more to my connection. So Athena is the owl, and the woman designed this one. I'm not entirely sure she based it on the Greek coins, but they tend to look like this too.
Yeah.
So to me, it's Athena, who is Zeus's daughter, but also has more of a conscience, shall we say, than Zeus, in my mind.
Sure.
So there's that one. And then Wednesday is Hermes, or Mercury, the planet Mercury, the god Hermes. And the reason our names of our days don't match the planets is because we have, for 4 of the 7 days, we have the Germanic name for those gods and goddesses.
Right.
So Wednesday is Wotan's day, Odin's day.
Right.
Whereas in French, I think it's called Mercredi, because it's Mercury Day. Thursday is Thor's Day.
There you go.
Yeah, rather than I can't remember now what the French name is for Thursday. But anyway, it's closer to the Latin. And then Wednesday is so it's Wotan's Day, but it's Mercury or Hermes. And Hermes is, almost my favorite. I refer to Hermes as my brother. It was totally spontaneous. I just started calling him that, my brother.
Mhm.
And so I got this wonderful pendant based upon a cameo of the 19th century. And it was
Yeah.
handmade by this wonderful woman online. And it's bronze. And then I did all these this is almost my favorite bead group of
Oh, those are beautiful.
there's rubies and there's citrines and various other stones in here.
Yeah.
And so this I'll often wear on a Wednesday.
So did you create the beading on both of these
Yes.
necklaces?
Yeah.
That's
I've
wonderful.
made a lot of necklaces. I have for myself. I haven't counted how many I have. There's a lot of them, but I've also sold a great many. I sell them at tarot events, and I have to work out how to photograph them so I can sell them online because everything, the events are closed down.
Yeah. Yeah. We should definitely get some selling going on because I want to buy one.
Yeah. Well, I'm planning to photograph the ones I currently have for sale for someone else who wants to see them, and so
Yeah.
I will send them photographs to you as well. What I have.
I would love that.
Yeah.
That would be very exciting to me.
Good.
And so it's amazing to see behind the creative process and to see that the creative process extends and when we go back to that numerology, that freedom loving adventurer, it's like we would think that the world of literature would be not really very boxing in at all because it's so wide and you can create universes and you're so freedom loving adventuring that it's like, I have to have other things too.
Yeah. I have to say that characterization for me is like Leo. It's this wonderful characterization. I love it. Freedom-loving adventurous storyteller. Wow, this is me. Or at least that sounds so conceited. All these great things. Yeah, that's me. That's right. But I mean, it is how it is the things I would like to think about myself.
Exactly. And that's the thing is that if we can, and that's why I do the numerology charts a lot of times is because there's so much in the world that tells us what's wrong with us or how we don't fit in or how we need to conform, that it's so liberating and so beautiful to take hold of and grasp and become and not apologize for being the wonderful human that we are and living into that, It's, and if people think that that's conceited, then maybe they need to look at how awesome they are.
Yes, that's very true. I was just thinking about those birth cards and tree of life things. Oh, now I'm hearing an echo of myself. Okay, it's going away. It's going away again. Okay, awful to have that. Anyway, but so a lot of people might not like the birth cards that much. I could see if I was 514, I would think, okay, Hierophant, don't care for him, and Temperance, not my favorite. But with every group, there are things in the middle that are wonderful. So if you're a 5, for instance, the very next card on the tree, which is wisdom, is lovers.
Right.
And then the card of moving that into the world for understanding is the chariot. And so then you have to meet this great thing immediately underneath Hierophant.
Yeah. There's it's a range of things, and it's so beautiful when I think we come to tarot. Some of us come to tarot and want it to be. In fact, there was a conversation just happening last night where someone was talking about how they like things to be very systematized, and so they wanted tarot to be, this meant this, and this meant this, and this meant this, and if it fell together like this, it meant this, and then had a whole big awakening when they realized that it's all kind of on this interesting spectrum, and the connections are different for different people at different times, and different questions and things.
So here's something interesting. So to me, the most important thing about tarot is that it's not fixed. You shuffle it. I mean, that's to me its most significant quality, which goes against, of course, all those people who see it all as a very strict system of correspondences, which you cannot deviate from.
Right.
So the tree of life has to be exactly as it's laid out, and exactly as the order of the cards is. So what I've done in the past, I've done this thing in which you take the major arcana and you mix them. You lay them out in the same pattern, which for me is the introductory card in 3 rows of 7, 3 horizontal rows like that, So that's your new tree. So what we have, the center tree is the Fool's Journey tree, right? But if we have the High Priestess as the first card, then the whole major arcana would be the High Priestess's Secrets. Things like that, right? But then it's struck me, once you lay it out, you can then do a tree of life using the same numerical order, but seeing which cards come in which lines on the tree in your new alternative version.
Yeah.
So it's always new, it's always fresh, it's always different.
Absolutely. And I love that there's a place where it's not absolute, where there's not an absolute right or an absolute wrong.
Yeah.
It's what resonates at the time. You really unlocked that for me in a big way a couple of years ago when we were having a conversation about, I had used the word believe. And you said, well, first of all, I don't really like believe, and because it's so fixed, and how very freedom-loving adventurer of you, right?
Yeah.
And I have replaced that since that day. I have replaced that with what I perceive right now is.
That's nice.
And it has opened up my whole way of thinking has been liberated, right, by that.
Yes.
Because it's not, I don't have to commit to this one thing that's always going to be this way. And it opens up perceptions, and I thank you for that. And my family thanks you for that. My children really thank you for that one, Rachel.
So while you're speaking of that, something came to me, which I think is really nice. So if you would replace I believe in a sentence with I embrace.
Yeah.
Isn't that a wonderful idea? So you don't believe something, you embrace that possibility.
Absolutely.
Just right now when you were talking about that came to me as a different way to express it.
I'll take it. I'll take it and run with it. Because I love that, because it is, I value my perception enough and feel invested in it enough to embrace it, take it in close to myself.
Yeah.
And commiserate with it for a while, right?
Yeah.
That's a cool thing. So, in talking about your books, because obviously we need to talk about your book. So Beatrix Gates just came out, didn't you say 2019 or was it 18?
Yeah, it was 2019, yes, yeah.
And so Beatrix Gates is comprised of, right, a collection of stories, an essay, and an interview. Could you tell us a little bit more about Beatrix Gates and what we might find there?
Okay. So it's part of a series called from PM Press, which is a radical press, but it's a series called Outspoken Authors, and they're all science fiction people. The editor, Terry Bisson, is a friend of mine for many years. He just decided to have some of these people, from his generation pretty much, present them maybe to new people and so on. So there's a whole bunch of wonderful people in this series. Ursula Le Guin, Michael Moorcock, a bunch of lesser known science fiction writers like me, and Paul Park, who's a wonderful, wonderful writer. So a whole bunch of people, So the idea is that he wanted to have, a bit of short fiction, some stories, and for each person, an essay and then an interview. And so that's what we did. And I decided that most people know I'm transgender and a lesbian. And so I go through periods of activism.
Right.
I came out, we didn't even say transition, it was so long ago, in the early 70s. So long ago.
Not an easy time to come out.
It's like 50 years, Yeah. So, but in that time, I have every now and then I have a period of activism, and I drop back into not wanting to be engaged with that stuff. I've responded now to the fact that there's this whole new generation, and I wanted to respond to that. So I've been doing some writing and stuff like that. So the title story, the Beatrix Gates, is set in a kind of I guess you would say it's a sort of transgender utopia in the future, in which, but it's also utopia of the imagination, which is really what I'm all about.
Oh, I love it.
The idea is that we now have body-altering nanomachines these
Sure.
microscopic things that can change the body, right? And so
Yeah.
bodies can be changed, sculpted, become all different. And so when this is introduced, it turns out that there's a problem, that all of the people who created them, the engineers and the biologists, can't quite get the hang of making it work. And then it turned out that the people who can are transgender people, because they're used to the concept of remaking everything.
Right.
And of just of a transformation of, and so they kind of become the elite of society. So it's a kind of just reversing roles. Obviously, they're the elite, and people aspired. It was fun doing that, and
Absolutely.
but the real fun of it, though, of that part of the story, is that it's not just about making yourself a preferred version. It's making yourself completely new and magical, and your body can dissolve and reform, and all these things are happening. People are writing etched into their skins, and one of the things I had fun doing was a man who has writing microscopically etched into his penis, and when it's erect is one thing, and when it's not erect it says something else. So the secret message is only shows when he's erect, which is
That's funny.
So the heroine of that part was this mysterious figure called Harp, and she's like this legendary figure, and she's pretty much transcended into a different dimension, and so people don't see her much. But anyway, but then within that story, I want to look at what people have gone through, in our time and before the current situation. So one of my main characters is really me fantasizing into the future, having made it past the revolution. and this version of me has a young lover who says to her, "Oh, tell me what it was like in the old days." And she says, "Well, I'll tell you a story." So the story is like an allegory of oppression, and it's about a time when everybody was either a red or a green. And reds and greens were seen as totally different species. They certainly couldn't mix.
Sure.
If you were red, you had to eat red food and wear red clothes, do everything red. And the same with green. Then you could maybe go to the same movie, but it had to be separate sides of the theater. And yet my main character, who's I guess she's a red, but she feels herself to be a green. She has this deep inner compulsion to identify as a green, which she doesn't understand. So she goes through this whole process, but at the end, the result of all this is that she comes back from her process, and she's living now successfully as a green, but she's had to break off with her family because her mother disowns her and finds her an abomination, which sadly happens. I mean, I just hear many terrible stories, not just about trans people, but queer people of all sorts being thrown out by their families. It's just astonishing to me that any family would do that. Anyway, but then she comes back to this moment when she had her transformation, in which she met this mysterious woman named Beatrix, who stood before this gateway, and it was a gateway to other worlds, in which nothing was fixed. Everything was constantly in motion, in flux, and colors especially. There were colors no one ever heard of or saw. And she's tempted to go through, but she says, "No, I worked too hard to get where I am now. I have to do that." And she leaves. And at the end, she has this experience in which she goes to Museum of Natural History, and she hears the radio astronomy, and they say this is like the old, the music of the spheres, but this is the reality. And she starts hearing real music. And it's the music that she's heard beyond Beatrix Gates. And so then she somehow manages to return there, and the gates are open for her, and she goes into the other existence. Because for me, all the stuff that we are doing we're embracing it. It's not a fixed reality. And and if you're different than other people, if you embrace that, that's your step towards going beyond everything, which you may never do. And other people have no desire to do that. But to me, that's part of what's going on.
Absolutely. And as the mother of all three of my kids are Leos, but as the mother of a Leo who is gender fluid, it is Thank you for
Hmm.
writing this. This is something that's going to be purchased today.
Oh, good. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
because
yeah.
the fluidity concept is a very interesting one too,
Yes, yeah.
because this individual is such a multifaceted gem that
That's so
some
wonderful.
days the light hits them one way and some days the light hits them
Yeah,
the
that's lovely.
other,
Yeah.
and they express themselves in whatever way that is with the freedom to do that. And
And
it's,
the freedom that they get from you.
well, and the thing is that
Because
I
think of
feel like
those parents who would beat a child like that.
yes, my
You know,
in fact
who
this
would
is the
throw them
reason
out,
why
who would say, you know, you have to be a boy or a girl, and you have to be the original version, you know, and that's it. You can't. I mean, it's
this
just
is
shocking that people do that.
that is the family that I grew up in with
Okay.
fundamentalists.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is the reason why we don't have anything, because because in opening up to the possibilities of, and not even the possibility, but the reality of what this human being who happened to come from my womb, and grace me
Uh,
with their presence in my
mm,
life,
yeah.
to be able to parent and come alongside such a wonderfully dynamic thing is like, my God, if I shoved you into a box, look what we would all be missing.
I know exactly. Isn't that? It's incredible.
And
Yeah.
it's just it makes so much more sense to allow people to be and express themselves. How, I mean, I wouldn't have given my kids two crayons, like you said, the red and the green. I wouldn't have been like, here's your coloring book and you
Yeah.
get two
Yeah.
colors. I'm the person that's like, come on, Crayola, we need like 120. What's happening?
Mm.
So we like to color with all the colors in the crayon box around here,
Wonderful. Oh, that's great.
and some really beautiful things come from that. And so I'm excited about reading Beatrix Gates and about sharing that with my child, who
Mm.
and for any of our listeners, I just know that when someone goes ahead and shares from those experiences and those stories and has the courage to do all that you've done, especially at the time in our history
Mm.
when you were standing in those places, it's just a really, really big gift that I just
Thank you
am
so much.
deeply,
Thank you so
deeply
much.
grateful for that. Thank you for being brave and amazing and wonderful.
You know, it's interesting. I'm writing this book about my life. And it's called On the Way I Told a Tale, or My Life in Tarot, Storytelling, and Magic. And one of the
Right.
things I realized thinking about this is, in many ways, my life began in 1970-71. Because in
Yeah.
that year, all within that one year, I discovered the tarot.
Hmm.
I kind of accepted myself. I came to terms with myself as I would say then it was just a woman, not even transgender, because that term didn't exist then, and started coming out to people. And I
Hmm.
sold my first professional short story. All within that one year. Is that amazing?
That is amazing, and comes back full circle to that thing about not believing but perceiving and
Hmm.
embracing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, look what you embrace the things and look at what came out.
I know.
Like,
But it's so fascinating that all these major things in my life within that same period. Tarot
that's
was first, actually.
remarkable.
Of those three, the tarot was the first thing. Spring of 1970.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. What was your first deck?
Oh, the Rider deck, but it wasn't the Rider deck officially. It was I'm not sure if it was unauthorized or. I know that when U.S. Games reduced their edition, that other one had to go off the market, so it might have been unauthorized. It was called University Press Edition. It's very prized now. It's very special.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I have. I don't have the very, very original one because that was stolen from my office. I was teaching at a college,
Ah,
but I have the one I got after that. It's so very old and worn out, and because my partner and I carried it through Europe and we were tenting, so it got wet and stuff like that. It's very
right.
special. Yeah.
Yep. It's interesting what the cards go through. And speaking of cards and what they go through, I have I happen to have this really wonderful 40th anniversary edition of 78 Degrees of Wisdom. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this as well, because this came out last year. This is my copy that my husband got for me, and it actually, he opened it up on around Yule and showed me that I actually had he got me one that has your autograph in it, which is very exciting.
That was a special thing I did. Yeah, we did. I forget what number it was. It was a good number, but definitely a special collector's item number.
So I'm thrilled by that, and it begs a couple of questions. You know, what do you feel like has changed in this 40 years since you wrote it originally?
Well, the thing that really strikes me now, which is so wonderful, is the incredible abundance of new decks. Books too, but new decks especially. And all of it made possible by Kickstarter and similar crowdfunding programs. Because you can be adventurous, you can be much more daring than if you had to get a publisher to publish it. And they have to invest a lot of money because of the way they end up selling and distributing things. So they have to play safe in a certain sense. But you can just, you don't need that many people to make enough money to publish a deck. If you find out how to do it yourself, you have to, it's a process. So that's a huge difference. I also think that there's a lot more variety in what people do with and what they expect of tarot. And there's less fighting about it. It used to be people would, the occultists would tend to look down on the readers, and the readers would, sort of, I don't know if they look down, but they would ignore the occultists, and there wasn't much mixing of things. People weren't doing it psychologically; they were just doing fortune telling. I'm not sure. Right now there's a great surge in people connecting to spirit guides, and sometimes they literally, told to them. I watch these videos. I'd like to find out if I could interview one or two of them to find out, are there points at which you're getting direct messages and other points at which you're looking at the cards? Because it seems to be it's a bit of a difference, and maybe both are always happening, but there's a ratio. At some point the messages are strong, at some point the cards are more strong. But that's a whole new way of doing it. And they're doing readings about politics a lot, about the public world situation, which we didn't used to do. So there's so much going on. I just love that. I think it's just wonderful.
Do you feel like tarot has come a long way in the mainstream in that 40 years as well?
It's starting to, like that article you mentioned in Teen Vogue, and the article I think in the Times actually recently made a reference to tarot. So people are a little bit less, but you still see the general attitude though, is like, creepy, weird fortune telling, either they're, satanic or they're crooks. Or they're gullible children who get possessed by demons. There's that's still there a lot, And also the idea that the tarot reader, sees all, tells all, that, you don't have to say anything, the tarot reader reveals all the secrets to you. Which is so annoying if you're a tarot reader.
It is, because that's not all.
It's just, it becomes a guessing game. It becomes a trick, It's not about helping people. It's about showing off that you can figure out what's going on with them. But they know what's going on with them.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes need to just have a place to talk about it. That the Teen Vogue thing was so interesting because like a K-pop icon mentioned you in Teen Vogue, specifically mentioning 78 Degrees. And so it's such a cool thing that you literally became the muse of an artist who wasn't even alive when you wrote the first edition. And it begs the question, did you ever really think that all of this would go so far and be so well received?
I'd say probably not. I think my fantasies would have been that it would be very well received within the occult world, within the divination world, tarot traditions, and maybe in fantasy writing or something like that. But I don't think it ever would occur to me to have such a wide reach, which is very
Yeah,
exciting. It's wonderful.
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so, as we kind of and was there anything else that you wanted to say about this newest work that you're doing in My Life in tarot storytelling and magic? It's so intriguing. When is that happening? What's happening with that?
Well, it's very
Anything
much
else?
in the process of, it's going to be long. I'm probably going to have to cut down a lot because I'm letting it go wherever it goes. And it jumps around a lot. But it's really, the thing that I've been becoming conscious of is that magic has always meant something different to me than to most people. And I kind of knew this, which is I knew how most people see the term magic. And I sort of, without thinking about it, embraced the word differently.
Yeah,
So magic is for most people it's like it's the kind of technology that you learn, that you commit yourself to. You can do spells, you can summon demons or whatever. And so it's a
sure.
lot of it's about power. And the power can be to transform yourself into a higher state of being, or it can be to, do things in the world. But either way, it's power. And witches cast spells for the benefit of themselves and people around them, and so on and so on. But for me, magic is things that happen to you or to me, and I'm talking about myself, that connects me to, in a sense, the spiritual dimension of being.
Mm-hmm.
And they happen a lot. And
Yeah, they do.
I don't know if they happen to me a lot or most people pay no attention.
Yeah, you have to. It's like
Yeah,
the whispers, right?
yeah. I think like, the magical slogan that came to me years ago was simply pay attention.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing you can do. But again, it's not that I want to learn to do magic. I want to embrace the magical dimension of living. And I
Exactly.
certainly do some levels of spells and things. But
Sure.
I try to keep that very modest.
Mm-hmm.
I now and then had like glimpses of the fact that they can be very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a little dangerous. Um,
Oh, it's certainly being that we're not omniscient.
yeah,
Uh, it definitely there are things that we might not have thought of
yeah,
before we
yeah,
go, right?
yeah, yeah. And often like you could do something in a temporary way, but then, if you're trying to help some situation, but then it comes back worse.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of stories I won't go into. It's a little bit, they were kind of heavy. Things
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do for people that worked to my kind of amazement, but then
Mm-hmm.
they didn't work for that long. And when the situation came back, it came back worse. And
Yeah.
so that's something to really be careful of. There's a wonderful book called All the Birds in the Sky by, what the hell is her name now? It'll come to me. Anyway, and it's about these two kids, and one is drawn to magic, the other is drawn to science, and then the world is in a crisis, it's a kind of dystopia, um, and so they each are trying to pursue it in their different ways, and the magicians, I mean, sorry, the scientists are seen as very arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
They're in danger. There's the idea of solutions are in danger in the world further. And meanwhile, the girl that becomes a magician, um, she keeps being held back by the people, the teachers, the magical group, and they keep warning her of aggrandizement. And it keeps sounding like they just don't want her to believe in herself. And it's like, a parent saying, you're too full of yourself. You need to, have more modesty and not think so highly of yourself. Um, and what happens then is she finds out exactly why they warn of this, because they give in to the idea that they're going to save the world.
Mm.
And the result is far more disastrous than the scientists.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous book. It's a gorgeous book. I can't remember, it's so good. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, the book is called All the Birds in the Sky.
All right.
Yeah.
And we'll include the name of that author and the name of the coin
Sure.
maker. We'll make sure that we get everybody's
Okay. Yeah.
credits
Thank
in
you.
there
Yeah. Yeah.
when we do
Yeah.
it. If you're watching or listening, look in the description because we'll make sure that everybody's names and things are in there.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so is there anything else you want to share before we start our closeout?
Well, I want to share something that actually just happened. That's
Okay,
it's rather heavy. I hope it's okay.
that's fine.
While we were doing this, my housemate Zoe was on the computer. She said, oh my God, she said. And then she said to me that Stuart Kaplan died today.
Yeah.
You know about this, okay? And I just felt I'd like to. February 9th, she just said. So I'd like to give a small tribute to Stuart.
Absolutely.
He did something that was in a certain sense genius, and that totally transformed tarot. He saw this thing that was obscure and the province of occultists and fortune tellers, and he saw this could reach the whole world.
Yeah.
And everything in a sense comes from that. I wrote about this. There was a tribute to him for his 80th birthday, and they asked me if I would. And that's what I wrote about. And it's just very moving to think of Stuart and everything he did.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to pay a tribute to him having this moment in which I was able to do that.
Absolutely. And so grateful are we all for his contributions.
Yeah, none of us would be here without him,
Yeah. And, he stuck his neck out a little bit to make that happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that was just some easy peasy thing to do.
But to me, it was a vision. I think he just had a genuine vision, I think by the stories I understand was he went to a card convention and saw tarot cards. And he just got that this could be something.
Yeah. And he embraced it.
Yeah, he embraced it and went with it completely. Yes, yeah.
Or we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, I know. It's a phenomenal thing. So I hope there's a great tribute to him in the tarot world.
Absolutely. He has left an amazing legacy for sure.
For sure, yes.
So if there was one piece of advice that you would give people, and you only got one,
okay,
what would it be?
Well, the one I always say, particularly, about tarot, but really anything, is what you love loves you. And I'm not actually sure. I might have made it up or I might have read it somewhere. But to me, it's like if you approach something, you have to. It's something you need to care about. If you approach tarot for the sake, okay, I'm gonna, learn how to do this to impress people and make money as a fortune teller, you might not get very far, or you might, but it wouldn't really be meaningful to you. But if you approach it with love, it will respond to you. It will love you back. And it's hard to explain what exactly that means, but it's a true thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it goes for the tarot. It goes for your books. It goes. It goes for your jewelry. It goes for your pens, right? All of those things behind the magic that you make. There are things that you loved and you embraced them, and they loved you back. And here we are, living in a different way than we might have been had you not embraced the things that you loved.
Thank you.
So thank you for doing that and for
wonderful.
setting an example.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And so now that we have spent some time together behind the magic, we'd like to pull cards to bring us all back into our day and time, keeping the magic that we've shared together today here with us as we go forward. And so would you like to pull the card first there?
Sure. So I mixed the Shine Tribe deck before, and I got the 10 of Trees, which would be the 10 of Wands. And you know how the 10 of Wands in the Rider deck shows someone bent down carrying a bunch of wands, a bunch of sticks? It's kind of impressive. I think actually the Golden Dawn name for that was the Lord of Oppression, something like that. So he's oppressed by his burdens. And I thought that the 10 of Fire should be joyous. But the 10 wands are all lined, the 10 trees are lined up, 5 and 5. So that's all you've accomplished. But then the new tree, the tree of life energy coming out of the solar system of existence, is just bursting forth. And if you can see at the top, there's like spirit beings, other branches.
Yeah.
So I think this is wonderful where we are with tarot and what's going on with tarot. So we're all like, now we're rooted in the world that's happened and all the things that have happened before, but now all of us are, bursting forth with new life, which I think is so exciting.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So that's the card I'm offering.
And the card that I pulled, interestingly, is the 10 of Coins.
Okay.
Which in the fountain, if I can get my light there.
Yeah, it's hard to see. It's a lot of reflection.
Yeah, and this particular deck is so filled with light, so it's a little challenging to see that one.
Yeah.
But it's the Ten of Pentacles in the Rider-Waite-Smith,
Yeah.
which is very interesting that we were just talking about Stuart Kaplan and the legacy, right? So it's the legacy. It's the legacy that we live. It's the legacy that we leave. It's the it's the collection of all of the things of a lifetime's worth of work and love and loving what you love and embracing those things.
Yes.
And so I would offer this with the blessing that I hope that our viewers and our listeners get as much out of this as you and I did today, and that we
wonderful.
all can go forward a little bit more mindful of what we embrace and that we can embrace, and that even very small, humble beginnings that don't seem like they'll go anywhere can sometimes go a very long way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
I had a great
today,
time.
Rachel.
Yeah.
So glad you joined me behind the magic today. To connect with me directly for a reading, life coaching, or more magic, visit amiemouser.com. That's AMIEMOUSER.com. I now return you to your regularly scheduled programming, the magical life you're living. May something you found here benefit you as you make your way.